Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sounding Board's Leadership Live. I'm Christine Tao. I'm the co founder and CEO at Sounding Board, a leader transformation platform offering coaching and mentoring. And I'm so excited to welcome Jennifer Zimmerman, who's an L&D leader at Curtis and many other places, including Bill.com, where we work together, to help us close out our last Leadership Live of the year. So, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today.
Well, look, I think we have so many topics that we want to cover, and we use this series really to help people get a peek inside, learning and development and how that actually happens, but also of you as a person. And so that's going to kick us off with our first question, which is, what's your origin story?
And I love this question. It's so fun. My origin story began with being surrounded by teachers. My dad and my mom both were teachers at a community college level. My stepmother's a teacher. My brother's a teacher. My grandmother's a teacher. My sister-in-law's a teacher. Like, you get it. I have all these teachers around me. And I'm a reluctant teacher. I'm a reluctant learning leader. I sort of ran from that for forever. When I was a kid growing up, when we would play adult, I wanted to be in advertising. I thought it was sexy and fun and cool. And so that's really where I wanted to be. Even in college, I started as an art major before changing to history. And I actually did have a role in a creative field, and it wasn't sexy and it wasn't what I thought it would be. And reluctantly, I left that company and I started working for Bank of America, and it was there for a very long time and got some exposure to a corporate learning department. And I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. The time I wasn't facilitating, but I had exposure to learning designers and facilitators and participants who were coming to learn, and just thought it was such a great space. So, after being there for about 12 years, that last half in learning and development, sort of dabbled in L&D and facilitation and other roles. And then it was at Bill.com really where I was hired to build out a learning function, and spent almost 9 years doing that, creating programs, bringing learning to the company, trying to create that learning culture. And it just fit. Like, maybe my parents and everyone around me was right for my whole life, because it really suits me and I absolutely love it.
That's amazing. So, maybe not in our public education system, but now absolutely a teacher and facilitator in our corporate system.
Absolutely. We can learn anywhere.
Agreed. And do you feel like just your personal background and your family being such a experienced set of educators, has any of that bled into how you think about learning in the corporate environment?
Absolutely. We always joked a little bit about my dad being a little bit of a nutty professor. Like, he was all over the place. He taught geography, geology, oceanography, like all of the ographies and ologies. And all of our summer vacations growing up, it was like, look at that fault line and the lifting and the rocks and the clouds and all of these things. So it's like the learning and the curiosity was always all around us. And it's something that we just grew up with. So it's not surprising that this is where I landed, given all of the influence from growing up and having all these learning experts around me.
Amazing. And Jennifer, we've seen that with almost all of our guests. A lot of it is, so much just that I think just in this field of learning and development, there's something about like the importance of the mission of what you're doing that really attracts folks into that field. And so we hear stories like this a lot, and often that then impacts your vision, or your philosophy for or dream for how that should be executed or implemented. And so you talked a little bit about that having an influence, but
Yeah.
could you share a bit more about what that vision and dream is that you've been driving towards as you've gone through this at different companies?
Yeah. I mean, I think number one, learning should be fun.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the irony. I ended up with a bachelor's and a master's degree in American history, and sitting in history class in high school, I wanted to like poke my eyes out with my pencils. Like, it was the boringest thing ever. It wasn't fun. And it wasn't until I had these great professors who could show what fun and engagement and learning looked like, that really gave me a passion, sort of lit something in me that I'm like, I want to know more. I want to know more of how this works and how it might be applicable to me. And so
Yeah.
that's something I think that blossomed really in me. And I want to bring that. I really try hard to bring that to different things that I'm facilitating or trying to help people comprehend is let's make it fun, but let's also make it super practical and understandable for people, accessible that they can use it right away, not some 1700 page theory book that like I don't even know what to do with this.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that either. So how can we make it more accessible for people?
Yeah. And how does that show up, out does that impact even the delivery or how you think about that, beyond just the maybe the experience or the facilitation?
Yeah, I mean, I try to break things down so they're really simple. Let's
Mm,
talk about like three things that we might be able to do to give better feedback, right? Like what kind of framework might be available? There's a ton out there, and what do they all mean? And how might it look in reality? So we could talk about SBI or situation behavior impact type of feedback. But if I'm in the moment trying to deliver that feedback as a new leader, what do those words look like? How do I start to use the muscles to create what that is? And so that practical part of the practicing of these theories, I don't want to talk about theories or these concepts or these
yeah.
skills, like how do we actually do it? So I might give examples of like what really bad feedback looks like. Hey, Jennifer, you're doing great. That doesn't help me at all. But if we say, hey, Jennifer, during your time at the last team meeting when you gave a presentation about Project X and gave all the details and the timelines, it was really insightful for people. So now people know, okay, great isn't good feedback, but giving more examples and ideas of how to frame it up for the specific situation, I think really gives people the insights to be able to say, oh yeah, I can do that too. I can use this formula to give feedback in a situation for one of my team members.
Yeah, and hopefully then teaching, people how to do that on their own, right? Like
Yes.
giving someone a what is it, a pole and instead of giving them the fish, right?
Exactly right. I want to teach them how to fish. And that's one of
Yeah.
the other things, like the cohort idea for learning is so important. They're not only can come to me or like their manager for the answer, but talk to each other because we have so much experience between all of us. And so being able to tap into that cohort that's going through this program or this class with you together to learn from each other and build on each other's experience, I think is another aspect of learning that number one, it keeps it fun, but also keeps it really practical. You may not always have the teacher around. So how do you use those skills that you have to figure it out? And if you can't figure it out yourself, figure out who you can reach out to help you with that solution.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit more specifically because you've done programs that cut across a lot of different learning objectives. And I'd love for you to just share some of the ones that you thought were particularly successful. And then maybe we can talk a bit more about like why that was and the outcomes and impacts of those.
Sure. One of the first learning programs in my professional career that I was a part of was when I was at Bank of America. And I was there for almost 12 years. And interestingly, I touched this program for almost all 12 of those years, even though I wasn't in learning the whole time. So we called it Leading with Advice, and it was a program that we designed to help private stockbrokers be able to sell different solutions that the bank had to offer. So this
Mm,
wasn't a leadership development program. This was really skill building. So it was huge. It was so robust. Like we had 12 different subject matter experts that led hour and a half long conference calls for the participants. Halfway through, they had to take a written assessment. At the end of the conference calls, they had to take another written assessment. Assuming they passed all of that and completed the conference calls, they got to come in person. So it was also a huge investment. And
mm,
we would do a role play. So they had a basic client fact pattern that everyone got, and they had to interview two clients, which were some of our subject matter experts, to uncover the need that they thought that they had and then present. They didn't know which of the 6 or 7 topics that they were going to get, so they really had to be prepared for everything. So they were in a room with 4 other people going through the same program. So, all the topics would be covered. So they got to learn not only how to articulate and present on their topic, but they got to hear and be able to offer feedback on the other presenters as well. So we're learning in the moment, we're learning from each other, we're learning from the subject matter experts. And then, they were evaluated. And if they passed the role play, which, we have pre 70, 80% pass rate, most people passed. Then they had an oral exam. They had one more exam that they had to pass before they were qualified to get leads from the commercial bank. So it was a huge investment of time, money, effort and resources from all of the subject matter experts, but it really played out to help them learn new things, get more confident in how they were selling and presenting to clients, and
Mhm.
be able to make some more money when they got those leads from the other part of the bank.
I love that. That is so interesting because, and I would think, it's akin to a lot of likely how companies might orient sales training for more typical, say, SaaS or technology companies. And the thing I'm noting is that you actually really tied in the training to what then would actually be very practically leads, help them actually meet their own personal and professional or, goals, performance goals that they had internally. Was that a construct that um, was critical part of designing that program or how? Yeah, I would love to
Yeah.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge thing. The brokers wanted to be able to make more money and sell more things, and the bank didn't want to put them in front of clients if they didn't know what they were talking about or they were saying it in the wrong way. So really, to cover any liabilities that might bring about, we really wanted to ensure that they were certified and trained and
Mm,
intelligently being able to talk about these different solutions. And so, it really helped not only the broker's bottom line through commissions and sales, but it also helped the company's bottom line through commissions and sales of these products as well. So it really became like a win-win solution. One of the other things that we occasionally would layer on to this program was a sales skills thing. We had some
yeah.
outside consultants come in and do consultative selling, and so I learned all of this also by osmosis, sitting through all of these classes. I'm like, wow, okay, I can help a client like understand their pain points and what might be a viable alternative by selling a solution, not like just going in for the hard sell. And it was,
Yeah.
all of this banking is very relationship driven. And so it also helped them to build a relationship through building their listening skills, building their, skills about understanding what their needs might be and not trying to pigeonhole them into one solution that they particularly wanted to sell, but the right solution for that client's position.
Yeah. And so that I think, an amazing example of a sort of skill focused learning program. And we've had experience in working with you across the, say, broader leadership programs. Would
Yes.
love to hear a little bit more about some of those. And then maybe we can come back to, is there differences in how you think about what drives success in more skill oriented learning versus more leadership?
Sure. So, yes, we had the pleasure when I was with Bill.com, to work with Sounding Board on a couple of leadership development programs. We started those around in 2018, and we had one version or iteration for the high potentials and one for top performers. That actually changed over a little bit of time to be more level based. So, one was up to senior managers and one was for directors and hires, but the intent of them stayed the same. We really wanted to upskill our leaders so that they were ready for that next role. They
Yeah.
were individual contributors as well as people managers. And they got coaching through Sounding Board, which was an amazing addition to the program. But we also built in other types of learning through our subscription with LinkedIn Learning,
Yeah.
and leaders that we would invite in to talk about other topics. We had project-based work that these different cohorts would have to do so they could step out of their normal roles and have a more wide exposure to what's going on in the business, to build that business understanding, not just in their own department, but company wide. And then we had them do projects as well. So, one cohort helped us redesign completely our overall onboarding program. One cohort designed and helped us implement a mentorship program. Multiple of the cohorts did different competitor analysis that helped with roadmap planning. And I think
Mhm.
one that was the unexpected sort of winner of some of the projects that we did, because they would change with each year's
Yeah.
cohort, was a business continuity program. So they got to glimpse into part of the business continuity plan and go through a disaster exercise to poke holes in what it is that was in the plan, and really poked some holes that were like, wow, the company really needs to fill those, and did.
Yeah.
So, it was beneficial for the company. It was beneficial for the people who were going through the program. I actually had the honor of being in the first cohort of one of the programs, and through my coaching and learning and development and growth for myself, I actually got a promotion through it. So the results of that are, amazing, because many people got promotions, many people accelerated faster. That we surveyed, of course, and the ENPS for both those programs were plus 62 and plus 72. So they were like
Off the
hugely
charts.
successful. Like people loved them and people were clamoring. Like we had wait lists for people to come into the programs. And we would have leaders reaching out all the time, like, when's the next one? I have 7 people. I'm like, you don't get 7 spots because it's only 20. You might get 1 or 2. But, these people, the participants, I think really felt special being invited to the programs and being able to participate, but they reaped huge benefits from them as well.
Amazing. And I feel like I'm already hearing this common thread of how much your design and a lot of the initiatives and programs you're running have such a practical component to them and almost immediacy in terms of how closely it's tied to the business.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
assuming this is intentional.
Of course.
But tell me more about, why that's important or like how do you ensure that that actually happens?
Yeah. Well, I think it's hugely important. I think as L&D professionals, we sometimes have ideas what we want to teach. That
Yeah.
may not always fall in line with what the business needs and what people need to learn. So oftentimes we have to sort of throw that aside and figure out through our stakeholders and leadership and goal setting at the company, what does the company need? What are the gaps that we're seeing and what do we need to fill? So that's usually the starting point when I'm trying to design a program. Like, what is the actual need? What is the expectation that if someone goes through this intervention or this learning program,
Yeah.
what's going to happen or be the benefit on the outside of that when they're finished with that program? And then that you start to work backwards. Okay, if we need them to be able to do this, then let's think about, the first step in that process to how to get them there. For leaders, it might be like, how do I manage a team? How do I have a one-on-one? How do I give good feedback? How do I be a better coach? How do I learn more about myself and communicate better? Okay, so those are all great objectives that could help them as leaders, but also help the business bottom line if people are more direct and giving good feedback and setting expectations and holding people accountable. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
So what does the business need? I think that's really the starting point. Then we think about what time and bandwidth do people have, right? How can we make this learning accessible and consumable for people where they're at? Maybe that's multiple time zones or, different learning abilities. So do we want to give some people pre-reads so that we can spend the time in an in-person session doing the more practical work, like practicing saying words or practicing different concepts and not wasting it during a lecture, right? That practicality, or we don't want to tout so much theory that we're not even sure what we're going to learn. So, we want to make sure that we're being considerate of all these different things so that we can make something that's super impactful and that will actually meet that expectation or the objective that's set out at the beginning.
Yeah. And where would you tend to gather that data? Was it things that were already available to you? Did you have a, name set of stakeholders? But it'd be great to hear both, high level, but also maybe practically how
Sure.
you were able to understand what those needs were.
Yeah, I think number one, it's having some clarity on who your stakeholders actually are, and if there isn't, trying to figure that out.
Right, right.
So through your network and through the people that are around you in the organization, if we're doing something, let's say for a marketing team, is the marketing leader on board with this? Are their senior leaders sure that this is the right intervention? Is it even a learning thing or is it a communication? So I think there's some like needs analysis that needs to go into these different requests to get a better understanding of what it is and what the expectation is. I'm
Yeah.
also a fan of talking to people. An example back at B of A, right? The learning designers wanted to build this whole big program to help sales supervisors, figure stuff out. And they built this program. They didn't talk to the implementation people. They didn't talk to the actual sales supervisors. So when they're like, okay, here's the program ready to implement, we're like, we can't do this. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the resources. We don't have the time. Like, we literally can't do it. You need to go back to the drawing board. And they had to.
Oh, wow.
So talking to people that it's going to impact, talking to people who have to implement it and support it, I think is huge. And so that may not be like top of mind when you're talking to a subject matter expert, but talking to the people who actually have to do the stuff is really important to help say, is this the right thing? Can we do this? Is this doable? And
Yeah.
then as you're going, like maybe don't do the whole deck first. Like, make an outline and shop that around. Like, does this
Yeah.
resonate? Does this seem like this is going to fill the need? Does this seem like we're going in the right direction before we put all of our resources behind it? And if it's not, make some iterations and, get it right before you go full steam ahead. And then once
Yeah.
it's right, still check in with people, have a pilot group, be open to changing things, be open to the feedback and saying, this maybe isn't the best way to present this idea. Like, it doesn't make sense. I did a training on a project management or decision making framework called DAISY. And on the first time I presented that, people are like, I don't get this graphic. So I'm like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and figure out a better way that it makes more sense to people. So I think you also have to be willing to be open to changing things up or throwing it away and starting over if it's not landing as how you need it to be.
Agreed. And sorry, obviously, my attempt to turn off my notifications didn't work very well. So hopefully, people caught that because that was, I think, it was going to be something I asked you about too.
Mm,
Because even we observed when we worked with you that your program changed year to year, right? And
absolutely.
sometimes, even like you said, midstream, you have to make adjustments based on what you start to hear, what you observe that's actually happening, all of that. And I think being able to be nimble is important. Have you found that? How have you tried to do that when you're running large scale programs like at, a B of A, very different than say a smaller scale program where you can count the number of people, on your hands.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to communication. If we have to
Mhm.
change, people understand things happen and maybe we need to pivot. There's a different business priority or, maybe an economic downturn and we need to get a little creative with how we continue to do that. So I think it's being upfront and honest and communicating early and often. Don't assume that people understand, really make that plain, simple, and clear so they get it. We're
Yeah,
not canceling, we're just pivoting or we're postponing, or here's the expectation, or we don't know what's going on, but we wanted to give you a heads up, right?
yeah,
Providing that contextual information, I think, is so huge. And then following through, right? If we still don't know anything, more communication, or we're so sorry, we're going to have to postpone this. We'll be back in touch in a month or two, right? But that partnership and trustworthy and relationship aspect of anything we do in business, I think, comes to play really in situations like that.
Well, maybe last question on this, and then I'll kind of pivot us to wrap it because we really only have a few more
Wow.
minutes. Is, as you've kind of looked at those programs, the ones that were more skill oriented versus, say, your leadership programs, do you find that there's commonalities around those? And then what would be some of the differences in approach that you've taken for programs that are more skill oriented?
Sure. I mean, I think there's commonality with all kinds of learning, leadership skills or,
Yeah,
behaviors and competencies. People, number one, I think have to be open to learning, right? If
yeah,
someone's very closed and like, I'm not changing, whether it's leadership or skill based,
yeah.
they're not going to they're not going to change. So I think that's like one hurdle that's very common between the two. I think the others really come down to, how are we presenting information and what those expectations are. If you're
Mm,
working on a very specific skill, it's an easier thing to measure, right?
yeah,
There's a yes or no question. Are you doing the new thing or are you not? Do you understand how to do it, right? Are you doing, if it's like a specific prescribed, like you need to click here, click here, click here, it's
yes,
very clear to understand how we're doing it or not. With some of the more like maybe leadership skills, but that are still skill based, like
yeah.
how to have a one on one. Okay, so like here's some specific resources and maybe checking in, a couple months down the line, like how is that going? What challenges are you facing? Do you have enough support? Do you need any more information? Do you want to practice how you might tee up this piece of feedback or coaching that you need to do? And it's a more tangible thing. I think you can
Yeah.
feel if people are doing this thing that you're asking them to do, it's a little bit easier. But on the leadership side, are you a good leader? Are you setting your team up for success and things like that? I think it's a bit more squishy and it's a much harder thing to measure. I'm
Yeah.
sure many of the L&D people who are here today, know about like the Kirkpatrick measurement and like measuring the impact of learning. I mean, even we had challenges with sounding board, right? Like if we're asking for ratings, it's a self-rating,
Yeah.
right? But how others experiencing it, I think it becomes a larger project to see like how is this going, and how are we seeing results, because it's not as cut and dry as like, are your sales increasing, yes or no, are you clicking these buttons, yes or no. It's sort of, maybe we're looking at engagement surveys, maybe we're doing some other types of surveys or 360s or self-evaluations and manager evaluations to see, are we seeing a general consensus that things are going in the right way, or are we still having an issue? And that might, you know queue up different types of conversations or different types of expectations or carrot and stick kind of things if we need to go there.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of similarities, but when you get to the measurement of things, that brings in some other things that you might need to consider.
No, and I think you're right, which is, of course, we have things off the shelf, but it might be self-reported, might be manager reported. There's data you have, right? Promotion rates, things like that, engagement rates that come from other sources. I think what's important is actually what we've learned is having that partnership between like us as the partner as well as the organization is where you'll get the strongest
Yeah.
measurement data, because it actually comes from so many places, especially when you're talking about things like leadership, which isn't, one specific thing, right?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's, again, going back to relationships. At
Yeah.
Bill, we worked with you for a number of years, and Nina, shout out to Nina, who's amazing. Like, she got to know our business
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
understand what we were looking for. And yes, it changed every year because
Yeah.
leadership changes and different priorities changed. But she started to build that relationship with us, and we were able to say, okay, Nina, like, we know we did it this way last year, but we're going to change it up. And like, she was able to go with the flow and like really help us be successful. So that partnership is also so invaluable.
Yeah, definitely a learning, and look, we'll say we appreciate it too, because it's not always possible both ways, right?
Yes.
So, well, look, I think last few minutes, I'd love to just close not only this series, but you get to close us out for the year, Jennifer. So,
Wow.
what would be no pressure, but
I'm feeling it a little.
what would be some of your advice to other L&D leaders? It's close of the year, but it's also a really busy time as folks are preparing for likely big initiatives they have next year. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few. I think for me, keep it simple and relatable,
Yeah.
right? Don't boil the ocean. We're not, maybe some people are. I've never, but it would be amazing to be able to solve world peace with learning and development initiatives. But think about what's needed. Think about how simple can I get this done? What's that minimum viable product that's still good, right? We still want it to be
Yeah.
good, but that's simple and it's going to get the job done, right? What does the business need? Consider what are those goals for the business or upcoming needs, and how can we relate that back to the learning, and also be able to show how learning is impacting those needs for the business. That'll also probably help get more leadership buy-in and support, which will help the success of your programs. Think about the time and bandwidth. We are busy at the end of the year. Maybe it's performance management season, close of the fiscal year or whatnot. What kind of time and bandwidth do your learners have, and how can you just make things very flawless and easy and seamless for them to participate in? If you
Mm,
have this huge barrier to entry, like you need to do 50 hours of pre-work and come for 3 weeks on site, like that's not happening, right? Like,
yeah.
what can we do to make it easy for people to want to participate? Because I think they do, right? And engagement survey results I've seen for years, like people want more time to do learning and development. I think a lot of people feel they have the resources and things to help them with that, but they don't have the time. So figure out, how can we make it work with the time that we have? What are leaders going to support and model? The best program, if leadership's like, man, we don't really care, no one else is going to care either. So how can we get leadership bought in and supporting it, so that that support trickles down in the organization and people say, oh yeah, like my CEO thinks this is important, I should think this is important and do it too. And
Yeah.
then really be clear about the benefits and expectations. Like, if you're part of this program, you need to finish it, because you might be taking a place, if you're not showing up, for someone who really would show up. So, think about what those expectations are. I think, and then really package it up to something that's going to be immediately usable and immediately practical for people to do it. Because if it's like, oh, I don't need this for 5 months, I'm going to forget it in 5 months. What do we need right now?
Yeah. Those are all amazing tips,
Thank
and Jennifer, I so enjoyed our conversation today. I felt like I learned a bunch,
Good.
and I'm sure that you have probably so much more to share, so we'll just have to find time for you to come back maybe next year.
I'd love it. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and thank you again, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Christine. Have a great holiday, everyone.
Okay, happy holidays.
Thank you.